What's up, guys?
Hey everybody.
How's it going? Today we're going to be talking about travel therapy housing, talking about whether you should take company-sponsored housing or should you find your own housing, is an RV an option, all the questions that we usually get asked about housing, people considering travel therapy, and then we'll also answer some of your questions at the end.
Yep. So as usual, Jared's going to get this pulled up in a couple of the groups so that more people can hop on and join in. So I'll just give kind of a brief background intro for y'all that might not know us. So my name's Whitney and this is Jared, and we are both traveling physical therapists. We have been traveling PTs for over 3 years now. We started out in 2015 as new grads, and we have a personal blog called Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist where we write about our travel adventures. And the reason why it's actually called Fifth Wheel, for you guys that might not have figured that out, is that we lived in a fifth wheel camper in an RV for the first about 2.5, 3 years. But yeah, we just recently, in addition to our Fifth Wheel PT blog, just recently started a new website, Travel Therapy Mentor. So we're trying to do a lot more informational videos, get a lot more information out there to you newbies that might be thinking about doing travel therapy. So I see that a couple of you guys are signing on. Hey Ryan, and there's a couple more coming on. So Jared's getting everything pulled up in a couple of the groups so more people can join us and ask questions this evening about travel therapy housing. So for you guys that are signing on, just go ahead and comment below and say who you are. And, you know, are you considering travel therapy? Are you a current travel therapist? Are you a current student? Are you a PT? Are you an OT? Just let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We are tuning in right now from Roanoke, Virginia, which is home for us. We are actually not on a travel assignment at the moment. We've been hanging out at home for about a month looking for our next assignment. So yeah, so tonight we're just going to chat a little bit about travel therapy housing, which is a huge concern that a lot of people have, and we get questions about it all the time. You know, how do you set up housing? That's kind of people's biggest concern after they find a job. Where are they going to live for 3 months, plus or minus? So, all right, Jared. So we're getting it shared on a couple different pages. Got a few new people signing on. If you guys are just hopping on, say hey below. So,
You can go ahead and start.
okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the biggest question when people are kind of new and they're just getting started, what they want to know is, do the companies provide housing or do you have to find housing on your own? So that's a really good question, and I know that a lot of people think that the companies will provide housing, and this is true. They will provide housing if you want them to. But a big thing to understand is how the pay works as a travel therapist. So part of your pay that comes to you is in the form of a stipend or a per diem, and that is allocated for housing. So if you take that housing stipend from them and you're able to find your own housing at a cheaper price than the amount they pay you, you can actually come out ahead financially because you can keep part of that money for yourself on your paycheck instead of throwing it all at housing. So if you instead let the company get the housing for you, then they will keep all that stipend and they won't give you the stipend. So you might not end up with as much money on your bottom line. So that's kind of the big thing between, you know, whether you want to choose the housing on your own or whether you want to let the travel company choose it. Typically they put you up in like furnished corporate housing, that sort of thing, and it's usually pretty pricey. Most of those are like $2,000-$3,000 a month. So they're going to wipe out your whole stipend if you have the company set up the housing for you. So we generally recommend, for the most part, if you're planning on, you know, getting into travel therapy to be the most lucrative and make the most money, we generally recommend that you set up the housing on your own. So yeah, that's kind of where we're getting at. So I see a couple more people are hopping on, and a couple people are telling us who you are and where you're coming from. So I'll read a few of them as more people hop on. So Allison is hopping on. She and her boyfriend are both PTs, and they're considering travel therapy. Thanks for joining us, Allison.
That's awesome.
And I see John Ross is hopping on. John, let us know where you're coming at us from and where you are in this process. I see Kai has hopped on, third-year student in Reading, PA. Did I say that right? Reading? Reading?
I
Reading.
think so. Yeah, right.
Looking to relocate to Georgia after graduation, so looking to hop into travel PT. So that's awesome. For those of you guys who've just joined us, please just comment below and let us know who you are, if you're a student, if you're a current clinician, and kind of where you are in this process of thinking about travel therapy.
Yep. So like she was talking about with the stipends, if you take housing provided by the travel company, you lose out on those stipends, and that can be a significant part of your pay. So I would say that normally a housing stipend might be $400 per week, or somewhere between $400 and $500 a week, maybe.
Yeah, maybe like 600 even.
Yeah, it just depends on the area. But if you take the housing provided by the company, then you wouldn't get that money. Whereas if you can find housing yourself for, say, somewhere around $1,000 a month, for example, then you get to keep all that extra money. So the majority of travelers find their own short-term housing and don't take the housing provided by the company for that reason.
Yeah. So there's a ton of different options. I would say that the majority of travelers, like he said, choose to find housing on their own, and the majority of them choose to just find short-term accommodations. Now, there are a subset of people that choose to do the RV lifestyle, like Jared and I have. Hashtag RV life. If you want to comment below and let us know if you're considering the RV life, like we've done. So we're going to actually do a totally different video next week on just the RV life, because that's a totally different process and all that. But that's one option that people choose to do, is buy an RV, or if they happen to already own an RV, just travel around in an RV, and then you already have your housing. You just have to set up at a campground. But the biggest thing that people do is get their own short-term housing. Now, one other option that it sort of depends on location. I've heard of some people just going places where they have family or friends and just choosing to stay there. So maybe, you have an aunt in San Diego, and you have a brother in Dallas, and so maybe you're only going to try to take contracts in those locations. That's great, and that would be really awesome as far as your housing. It is going to set you up to have a little more difficult time, I guess, finding jobs, because you're being a little more picky about exactly where you're going to go. And the other thing is, from a financial and a tax perspective, you would still need to pay that person rent. So that's a little bit advanced, and we can definitely talk about that maybe on a different video as far as your tax home issues and tax law issues. But you do need to, if you're maintaining a tax home and receiving tax-free stipends, you do need to have expenses, duplicating expenses at home and at your travel site. So if you did choose to just hop around to locations where you could stay with a family member or a friend, you would need to still pay them and set up some type of rental agreement.
Yeah, and that's probably not a big deal for most people. And if you can do that, if you can find a travel assignment near where someone lives, someone that maybe you don't see that much, like a close relative that lives far away, then that's the ideal situation. So if you can move there, pay them some money to stay in a room there. But yeah, it's very limited, and you might have to commute. So say, if you have a family member that lives in Seattle, for example, you might be an hour outside of there, and you have to commute in. So that's the biggest disadvantage there.
Yeah. So as far as housing options, so far we've said RV could be an option. Staying with family or friends could be an option. Oh, another one I want to randomly throw out there. I've seen a lot of people ask recently, could you live at home and take a travel assignment, within a commutable distance, an hour or so outside of home? Jared just got a little compliment.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. And what's going on, Will? Good to see you in here.
And hi, Lauren. I see you're signing on. For those of you guys that are just hopping on, just let us know why you're here and where you're at in this process. But anyway, so can you take a travel assignment close to home and just live at home? Yeah, technically you can. Again, you would just run into some tax law issues. You would not be allowed to take the tax-free stipends if you chose to live at home and commute within, an hour or so.
Yeah, and so the big disadvantage there is you're probably going to get paid similar to PRN. It's a little better than PRN, though, because you're going to get full-time hours, you'll have benefits, but you're going to be making about PRN wages instead of making travel wages, which are, in general are going to be higher. So, if the full amount's taxed, you're not going to make as much, but there are benefits to that. So if you can find a travel job within your home area, then it might still be worth it for you to do that, even though you don't get the tax-free stipends.
Right. So let's hop in and talk about the main one. What do most people do? And that is, most people choose to find their own short-term housing.
Yep.
Okay.
I would say probably somewhere 75% or more of people find their own housing that way.
Yeah, so most people choose this route. So there's a lot of different ways. I always tell people that when you're looking for a travel job, there's a balancing act that occurs. So you've let your recruiters know, some places they've submitted you to some jobs. You've had some interviews. So maybe there's a day or so after they say, hey, we have a job in Los Angeles, and you're going to be interviewing, and you'll get a phone call in the next couple of days. So now you have a couple of days to try to think about, okay, is there going to be housing in that area? And at least that's what I've done.
Yeah.
So we've mostly traveled in the RV. And for us, with the RV, as soon as I find out about a potential job or potential location, I immediately start to look to see if there's an RV in that park in that area.
Yeah, and that's a huge upside of the RV is that we can find housing usually within 15 minutes of being presented with a job.
Yeah.
We know if it's an option or not based on if there's a campground nearby. We can look at their rates usually online. If not, just call them and we already know everything about it. So
Exactly.
that's a big advantage.
Right, and it's not quite as easy with short-term housing, which we're actually finding out now. We've done short-term housing for our very first assignment 3 years ago, and now for this current assignment that we're interviewing for, we're looking at short-term housing as well.
Yep.
So what we've done is, as soon as we hear about a job, hey, it might be a job in San Diego or Los Angeles, I immediately go online and I start looking just to get a feel for what the area is going to be. So where are some places that we might search to start looking at?
The first place we always go to is Airbnb to see if there's any long-term housing nearby that might be affordable. What we normally find is that Airbnb is pretty expensive though, and we're normally trying to keep our costs as low as possible. So another place we go is Craigslist, which usually cheaper, but also can be more sketchy for sure. So there's pros and cons of both of those.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other websites that some people will use. There's one called Furnished Finder, which I think started as a travel nursing housing site, and it's people that list homes specifically for the purpose of travel healthcare professionals, and they're usually short-term contracts, but it's kind of limited. For example, we were looking at a job in Yuma. I typed in Yuma and there was nothing at all. So then you kind of hit the next website. So there's VRBO, you can search. Let's see, calling around to extended stay motels is another option.
Or just even apartment complexes to see if they have any kind of furnished housing, or
Right.
sometimes even unfurnished. But the main thing is finding somewhere that doesn't make you sign a year lease because, or even a 6-month lease, because chances are you might not be there that long. And if you get locked in, then you're really in trouble. So it either has to be month to month, which most apartment complexes don't like unless it's like a higher price furnished place, or a 3-month lease at the most. And even then, if your contract ends early, then you can lose some money that way for sure.
Right. So kind of the timing part is tricky. Me personally, Jared and I, we really like to have an idea going into the interview or before we even accept the job if there's going to be housing, and if it's not looking good, we won't accept. However, there are a lot of travelers that will just go ahead and accept the job if they think it's going to be a good job for them, and they'll figure out the housing later. So it depends on how comfortable you are with that, and a lot of them have good success with it.
Yeah.
It just depends on, you have to play that a little bit of kind of a back and forth game, kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, another thing to consider is if you're going to be traveling by yourself or with another person, because if you're traveling by yourself and you're pretty lenient on housing, you can find places in like a room and a house, usually for pretty cheap, which is great. But a lot of those places, they don't want a couple to be there or two people together. So we've had some situations where on Craigslist or something, we might find a room and a house for $500, which we'd be fine with, but they don't want two people in that room. So that can be a deal breaker. But if you're traveling by yourself and you're lenient, you can usually find some pretty good places for pretty low cost if you can rent a room in a house.
Yeah. So there's kind of some pros and cons, because if you travel together and you end up finding a 1-bedroom or something, and say it's $1,200 or $1,500 a month, at least you're splitting the cost, which is good. But if it's a place where it's harder to find that short-term lease, and you can really just find like a sublet or something, or a room in someone's house that they're willing to rent out, then you kind of benefit more by being an individual who can, get by living in a room in somebody's house or a garage apartment or, a guest house or something along those lines. So yeah, kind of just the timing of it is, you just have to choose what you're comfortable with. Am I going to go ahead and commit to a job without knowing there's housing? Or am I going to wait and have something lined up? And you may or may not have time to wait. Sometimes these jobs go fast, so sometimes you just have to go out on a limb and go ahead and accept.
Yeah, there's a lot of travelers that will just accept an assignment that sounds good to them and then just hope that the housing goes well. And sometimes it works out fine, and sometimes it leads to a lot of stress. It just depends on the place and the situation.
Yeah, so another thing as far as the timing, so say you do go ahead and accept the job and you don't have housing lined up. Now, some people will, you might have 2, 3, 4 weeks before that assignment's going to start. So now you have 2, 3, 4 weeks to go ahead and find out about housing and maybe commit to something over the phone without seeing it. Or maybe if it's within driving distance, you drive up there and you check it out and you confirm something. Or something that some people will do is they'll go ahead and just book a hotel or an Airbnb for the first 2, 3 nights or a week and get there a little early, stay somewhere else, and then once they get there, you might be able to go, you could drive around town and hop into a few offices and talk to people in person and go ahead and set up an apartment that way.
Yeah, and even if you don't get there early, if you just get there on time and stay in a hotel for the first week, and then you ask around, like, the clinic, patients, whatever, usually someone knows something about housing, and that can be a good way to do it too. If you're willing to, you obviously you have to move a week after you get there, and you'll have to pay higher price for the hotel up front, but that can be worth it, because if you find something on Craigslist and you're not close enough to drive up there, you got to be very careful about scams on Craigslist, because people will say things like, "Oh yeah, I've got this place available. Just send me the deposit. It'll be fine." And then there's no way for you to verify that they're the owner of the house, or we've seen situations where like someone will be trying to rent out an apartment that's not theirs, or there's all kinds of crazy things that can happen. So that's something to definitely be careful about, and that's a big advantage of somewhere like Airbnb, where you can read reviews and that it's actually their place.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people aren't really comfortable with committing to something sight unseen, so they'll do that, just cough up the money for the first week for an Airbnb and then figure it out once you get there. The other thing is some people might be more comfortable with that as a renter. They might want to meet you in person, or maybe you meet your coworkers and you might hit it off with somebody and they might be more comfortable recommending they have a place for you to stay, or their friend has a place for you to stay, but maybe they're not going to recommend that if they don't know you yet over the phone. So we got a couple comments coming in, so we'll answer a couple things here, and then I got a few more points I want to touch on. Okay, so Lauren, hey Lauren. Lauren is a current third-year student who's graduating in May, and she's planning to do travel in August. Just trying to learn everything. Yeah. That's great, Lauren. We've talked a few times now, so I'm glad you're joining in just to learn about a few different aspects. That's really great.
Yeah, the research up front is the biggest thing.
And I know John's in the same boat. John wants to know, how far in advance do y'all typically have to look for housing to find something?
So for us, being in the RV, we don't have to look far in advance at all. Almost every job we've ever taken had a campground within 20 minutes or so, and that had openings for long-term housing, like month to month or whatever. Usually it's month to month at campgrounds. But for short-term housing, pretty much as soon as you know that there's a potential job in an area is when you need to start looking. And you won't know that in advance. Like a job might pop up today that wants you to start next Monday, so you'd start looking as soon as you possibly could. And I mean, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on the area and how many people they have going in and out for short-term that need short-term housing, basically. Yeah,
because some places, like for example, I know Yuma was one. Well, Yuma's not a really great example. So
Another
Yuma.
beard compliment. Look at this.
Oh, hi George. Thanks. Yeah, it does look pretty good. I haven't seen you in a few days. It looks pretty good. I was out of town. But yeah, so like in Yuma, I know that travelers go in and out of Yuma a lot. But then it was also the time of year where snowbirds, but they call them something else there. Anybody know what they call them in Arizona? They don't call them snowbirds, apparently. I learned. Anyway, so a lot of the older people that were moving there just for the winter had already taken up the short-term housing. And so I thought there would have been a lot of options, but there, it just depends on your timing. There may or may not be. But then other people, like I've seen on a lot of Facebook groups that we participate in, like housing groups, somebody will say, hey, I'm looking for housing in Richmond, Virginia, and immediately 3 people will comment and say, I have a room, or I know of something, or I just left there and I lived with this person. And then you might just, make connections like that and have it set up right away.
Yeah, something else to consider is that there's, since there's travel nurses and travel therapists always looking for housing, there's groups on Facebook specifically for travel nurse and travel therapy housing. So that's a very, very good resource to use.
Yeah.
I know that George has done, I think, almost all short-term housing on his contracts. How's your experience been with that?
Yeah, George, let us know, because you've been doing this for a while, so you always have to set up that short-term housing.
Yeah, I know he's lenient, and I think he usually takes rooms and houses, which is perfect for a single traveler for sure.
Right.
Good way to save money.
We even, when we were calling around in Yuma, one of the options that I was looking at on Craigslist, which a lot of people might not be comfortable with this, but it was a model a
Park model.
a park model RV, which is basically like a trailer home.
A little bit bigger camper.
Right. So it's somewhere in the middle of like a modular home or a trailer, which we are totally fine with because we know what it's like to live in a camper and it's not a big deal to us. And this guy was running month to month, and had we end up taking that job, he was running it month to month for $1,000, and
Yeah,
that would have been
perfect for us.
Perfect. So much better than like a lot of the unfurnished apartments that we were looking at. As far as like I think they were $1,500, $2,000 a month. So
Yep, and something to consider too is furnished housing is going to be more expensive. Unfurnished housing is going to be less expensive, but you're going to have to figure out something to do with furniture. Some people just travel with like a blow-up mattress and like folding chairs and stuff like that, which I would be fine with. I don't know if Whitney would do it. But you know,
wouldn't be bad.
you can always like rent. There's that what is that store?
Aaron's.
Aaron's or Rent-A-Center or stuff like that people sometimes will rent like a living room suite or something for $100 a week. Or there's various ways to do it, but that's another factor to consider. So you're going to find that short-term furnished housing is more expensive. Unfurnished is less expensive, but you still have to do something about furniture. So
right, and I've even heard of some people bringing like a small trailer with them that had maybe just a mattress and a couple. Some people will use like those plastic pull-out drawers instead of a dresser, maybe a small sofa chair or something along those lines. A Tupperware bin of your basic dishes, or you can go to Goodwill and get some basic dishes and pots and pans. So there's a lot of different ways. If you do end up being in an unfurnished place, there's a lot of ways to get by for 3 months, or even yard sales, or sometimes people will show up an assignment and ask their coworkers, and they might be like, oh, I have a coffee table you can borrow, or I have a couch you can borrow. So there's a lot of good ways to do it once you get there. You just have to be a little bit flexible on this part of the travel life.
yep.
So, okay, Lauren wants to know, what are some housing groups that you recommend? The names are, there's like
Travel nurse housing.
by the
it's
Gypsy
by
Nurse.
The Gypsy Nurse. That's one we're in.
I know Furnished Finder is an actual website, but they also have a Facebook group, Furnished Finder.
Yeah, I think those are the only two short-term housing we're in. We are in some RV short-term like place type groups, but
After we get off the video, I can copy and paste a couple of the names in the comments for you guys of the ones that we're in to search. So, a couple other options. Oh yeah, so extended stay hotels like Extended Stay America. There's a couple others that do kind of like corporate housing. Those are some good ones to call around to. I've even looked on like if you're in a college area, sometimes college websites will have short-term housing listings like sublets and that sort of thing. So that's a good place to look. I know you can even call around to like, apparently you can call around to like the Chamber of Commerce, I think, and ask them about housing.
I've heard of people like calling realtors in the area and asking there. I mean, there's a lot of different options, and if you are really dead set on taking a job, you can find something for sure. It might not be really cheap, but you can definitely find something.
Yeah. So that's most of what we had to talk about. If you guys have any questions or anything that we haven't covered, go ahead and comment below and ask us on the housing front.
Yeah, I guess one thing I should mention, I did a poll a while back trying to determine the difference in cost between short-term housing and like how much RV sites were, just to write an article about. And what I found was most people that do short-term housing said that the average monthly cost was about $1,100. So that was furnished with utilities included. So that's really not terrible considering how much more you make as a travel therapist. So it's pretty decent.
Yeah, and then we had another friend, he was saying that, and he's a solo traveler, he was saying that he kind of bases it on his comfort zone for how much to pay is if he can at least find something that would be covered by 1 week worth of pay for the whole month, then he feels pretty good about it. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So you can imagine the average PT contract is going to be anywhere from $1,500 to $1,800. So if you wanted to follow that rule of thumb, as long as you can find something under $1,800 a month, that's pretty decent.
Yeah.
Now us, I mean, we're super frugal, and like the campgrounds would be like $300 to $400 a month, split between two. But of course, you have to factor in the cost that we bought the RV and bought the truck.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that next week. Another thing to consider though with that 1,100 number I was talking about is that that's the average across the whole country. So that's going to be skewed up by a lot of travelers that are in Southern California. Housing there might be $2,000 for a studio apartment, so that's going to move that number up quite a bit. So our only experience with short-term housing, we found it for, I think it was
700 or 800.
Yeah, I think it was $700 a month for split between the two of us, and that was in rural Virginia. So you can find places that are way cheaper than that. That's just the the average across the whole country.
Yeah. So that's most of what we wanted to go over. Like I said, next week we're going to do one just on RVing and that whole process, like everything from, buying the RV to finding campsites and that sort of thing. But if you guys have any more questions that you can think of as far as housing, just general housing, short-term housing, go ahead and comment below and we'll answer that today.
All right. Good.
Oh, Kai wants to know, I have a medium-sized dog that will be coming with me. Do you know any people that travel with pets? Absolutely.
There's a lot of people that travel with pets. Not every single traveler, but most travelers that travel by themselves have a pet, I would say.
Yeah, so he wants to know about strategies for attaining housing. I think you'll be in better luck with a medium-sized dog. I mean, as you know, there are breed and size restrictions that some people have at certain apartment complexes or maybe personally. I think you would have a harder time finding a room in somebody's house because they're probably not going to want you to bring your pet. They might have their own pets, that sort of thing. But a lot of apartment complexes will allow pets. So if you can find an apartment complex or just a one-bedroom rental or a condo or something where they allow pets. But most people have pretty good luck with it, I would say.
Yeah, if I was in that situation, that would sway me more towards going the camper route because, campgrounds almost never care if you have a dog. I think we've run into a couple that didn't want pets there, but for the most part, it's not a big deal at all. So that makes it a lot easier because, you're going to have a more difficult time finding short-term housing with a pet, but it's the same process. It's just that, you have one extra question to ask and one more filter to put in there.
Yeah, I will say it will probably make it harder for you, and people do it all the time. We know so many travelers that have pets. We know travelers that have kids. We know travelers that are couples. I mean, people make it work. It is a headache, but they make it work.
Oh.
Yeah, so I would say this is a big topic, and this is I know the biggest complaint I've heard from people that end up stopping traveling after they've traveled for a little while is housing.
Yep.
Like people will typically say, I got so sick of trying to figure out the housing.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue. Which, and that is a big reason why some people end up going the camper route after a while or start out that way is because it's a lot easier. It's less headache. It's easier to move. Moving from place to place can be difficult depending on how much stuff you have and if you're moving furniture and all that can be a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, it does have its own sets of pros and cons that we'll talk about next week.
Yep.
But housing can be tricky, but look at it this way. I'd say, like we said, 75% or more of travel therapists and travel nurses do short-term housing and they make it work and they still love it. So you guys will find a way.
Yep, and even though it's a little more expensive, the pay makes up for it, so that's always a great thing. Josh just joined. I think he's got, I don't know how many more months until he's going to start traveling, so that's awesome.
Yeah, thinking about it. So if anybody has any other questions, just shoot them to us below. If you would, just like the video or share it. If you know anybody else that's interested, you can tag them below.
Yep. So next week we're talking about traveling in an RV. We'll talk about the pros and cons. So if you have any questions about that specifically, ask them below. We'll add that in next week. Any comments about this video or anything for next week, that would be great.
Yep.
Just let us know.
Okay. Camper route is the plan. That's awesome, Josh.
Yeah, it's a good way to go.
Hashtag RV life. But all right, guys. Well, it's been good talking to you, and thank you guys that joined in tonight. If you have any questions, just comment below or feel free to shoot one of us a message, and we'll be happy to answer them however we can.
Yep. Take care.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.